Hi, I'm Bethany Dawson and welcome to My Classic Soul, the podcast dedicated to the best soul and R&B music throughout the decades. In our latest episode, soulmusic.com founder David Nathan and distinguished entertainment journalist Janine Coveney, former R&B music editor at Billboard magazine, discuss Private Line, the 1991 debut solo album by the late Gerald Levert. David and Janine share about Gerald's heritage as the son of Eddie Levert of the OJs, how he broke through the stereotypes of black male vocalists of the day to achieve consistent success in creating a solid audience for himself. So, let's join David and Janine as they share their thoughts about Private Line.
Today, Janine, we're going to talk about somebody that we both had the opportunity to meet. And really made a massive difference in the world of soul music, and of course came from a heritage of great soul music singing. And we're referring to the late and much missed Gerald Levert.
Indeed. And I'm glad to be here to talk with you about him because, you know, he was an important voice. And I think people forget the role that he played in the world of R&B music and entertainment at a time when R&B was kind of changing with more hip hop influences. And I'm sure we'll get into that. But yeah, we both got to work and meet Gerald. And so we have a personal view on his story, his music, and his work ethic. So I'm excited to talk about him with you.
And what we're going to focus on is actually, as we, focus on his first solo album, which was remarkable in as much as, am I correct? I think it was a platinum album out the gate, as they used to say. And, I just think it's worth talking a little bit about the setup prior to that and how the public became familiar with Gerald through his work with Levert. I was checking one thing which I actually had forgotten about, his duet with Mickey Howard, which was a phenomenal record. I think that was one of the first times I became really aware of the power of his soulful voice. So let's go back. Let's talk about Le Groupe Levert a little bit, and then we'll lead up into talking about the Private Line album. So do you recall your first time hearing the Groupe Levert?
I don't have a specific moment that I remember, but I do recall that it was before I got to Billboard magazine, and the song Casanova, which was so catchy and so clever, and thinking, wow, the OJs have a brand new sound, because of that voice. I just thought it was the OJs. So it was really fascinating to me that this was Gerald Levert, the next generation of Levert, and kind of bringing that kind of Philly soul, Ohio soul sound into the new generation, into the hip hop, New Jack Swing generation. And I thought it was clever, and also because of how they looked. There weren't many plus size singers, although we had Luther Vandross, whose size changed from time to time.
Well, yeah. So he was plus and then minus. So yeah, I get it.
Yeah. So, but I liked it. Casanova was such a clever song because of using that cultural reference of who Casanova was, a lady killer. So, and he's saying, I'm not that. You can trust me. And I think that's a hallmark of all of his songs, that he was the lover. He was a sincere lover. You know what I mean? He wasn't out to fool anybody. Yeah.
He wasn't a player.
Right.
Well, we may have been a player
in life,
off stage, but that's a different conversation.
That's a different story.
Yeah. But yeah, I agree to you. This is so interesting when we talk about Levert, the group. Well, of course, I do remember Casanova. I think for some reason, the song that always comes to mind for me is Pop, 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 Pop Goes My Mind. I don't know how many, that was the right number of pops. But anyway, I think what's so great about because and there was also a family group in as much as it was Gerald, his brother, and somebody who was not related, Mark Gordon, but still there was a sense of the continuation of a family tradition, and I was trying to think of other trios of that time period, like late 80s, and I couldn't really come up with any. Do you remember any trios of that time?
After Seven, were they a trio or a quartet?
I think they were a quartet.
More of a quartet, yeah.
Yeah. But and then they were a little after Levert, so Levert as group comes like in the like 86.
In the late 80s.
Yeah, 86, 87. Janine, was it obvious to you that Gerald was going to have a solo career? Was that inevitable, do you think?
I actually do think so, because he was the voice of Levert. He was the main sound of it. He was the architect of it. It worked as a group because you had a nice stage presentation and you had three guys, but I always felt that he had the star power. He stood out. So it did not surprise me when he went solo at all. Mm-hmm.
And then, I think that it's not always the case that someone comes out of a group, no matter how successful, and is able to launch a solo career with a platinum album. That doesn't happen every single time. And one of the things that you and I talked about in preparing for this conversation is, and you referenced it already, the fact that Gerald wasn't the stereotypical, soul music vocalist in terms of his look. I mean, obviously we can go back to Barry White, and we can go back to Luther, I guess, as you said, like plus and then minus. Look, but I don't think that people bought Luther's records because of how he looked. They bought them because of his sound, obviously. But with Barry White, if I go back to Barry White, and I kind of think in some ways that Gerald was kind of in that lineage of guys who were big guys that didn't seem like the natural kind of sex appeal matinee idol of of some of his contemporaries even at the time. So let's talk a little bit about it, because I think that has a lot to do with the way he was embraced, particularly by African American women, which was a large part of his audience. So give me your perspective on Gerald, and his image, and what do you think it was? I mean, yes, it was his voice and his sound, but I remember he was still, really kind of fell out in a nice way around him. They really did. So let's hear from you about it. Yeah.
Well, I do think that he was a big guy, but he was one of those, big teddy bear, lovable guys. He was nimble on his feet. He could sing. He was charming. He had a great smile. He charmed people wherever he went, and we can attest to that on a personal level. And that's what he did in the business. So in terms of being a romantic idol, my mother used to say there's a lid for every pot. And, and not everybody, some people like a larger guy, some got like a more muscle guy, some guys like a tall guy, there's someone for everyone. And Gerald seemed to kind of, he was bigger than his presentation. And that was attractive. That was attractive about him. He wasn't shy. He wasn't hiding it. We'd already seen Heavy D with his overweight lover in the house kind of vibe, and that worked. And I think to some degree, between those two artists, because as you said, we had artists who were heavy before, but these were kind of guys who were contemporary. They were young, and they were still attracting females. And I think the record labels had to wake up to the potential, the potential that someone like Gerald had to build his audience. And it was a lot of females, but a lot of men too, because men saw themselves, not every guy is a gym rat. Not every guy, pushes away the fried chicken. Gerald represented them too, so that was part of it.
Yeah, sorry, I got completely sidetracked with the Kentucky Fried Chicken reference because it actually did evoke another memory related to Luther, who, of course, was never ashamed to admit that he loved his Kentucky Fried Chicken. But anyway, we digress. I digress. The other thing too is I think that what is really important is that there was how he looked, but it's also how he sounded, and that he had an authentic, soulful voice.
He did.
That really, because you could just be a big guy and not sound so great, but he really had the, that real like tradition of course, coming from, being the son of Eddie Levert. I mean, I guess it wasn't too hard to have heard, the kind of impact that Eddie had. And in fact, even if we think about it, Eddie and the OJs, I mean, they also weren't like, they weren't
typical matinee idol.
I mean, they weren't like they weren't, I'm trying to think of a contemporary group to the OJs, but in terms of their look, I mean, they weren't pinup idols, shall we say, but right. It was their sound and the soulful sound. And, as I was listening to the solo album, which we're going to talk about more, Private Line, I was really struck by how much Gerald's like that soulful feeling, that intensity came through on some of the tracks. So let's launch right into it. So let's talk about title track, Private Line, because you and I did have a little conversation about that prior to the podcast. So would you like to share with everyone what you thought Private Line was about?
Well, it's funny because it had been many years since I'd heard it, and so I listened again. And as you say, he has that wonderful voice that's the bridge from his father's generation to the newer generation. But also his songwriting kind of pins it to the times, okay? And that happens often because I thought Private Line, as I recalled it, was going to be a song lyrically that said, girl, you can call me on my private line. You can call me anytime, that kind of a thing. I'm available, in other words, for romance. But when I listened to it again, I realized that the lyrics were not saying that. They were saying, you and I are broken up. I don't want to hear from you anymore. Stop calling me. You cannot have my private line. You can call my service. You can call my service as many times as you want. That's what the song says, because I don't want my heart broken anymore. And so I was kind of stunned by that reference, that twist on the idea, because as you mentioned when we talked, there's so many songs begging a romantic interest. Please call me. Please call me. So what's your response?
Well, let's play before we go to my response. Let's hear some of Private Line. I also went back and listened to it, and the thing that is interesting, he does sing, you can call my answering service anytime. In fact, he does sing that, which is another way of saying you can call, it doesn't mean I'm going to call you back.
Right.
Because as you and I were talking about back in the day, before cell phones, before mobiles, even almost before
answering machines.
We did have an answering service, and I had one for sure in the 70s in Blues and Soul, office it wasn't an office, it was my apartment in New York. So of course, if I went out, there was no machine to take a message if I wasn't there. And so I had to have an answering service. And so that was also a throwback to another era when I don't know that everyone had an answering service, but I think if you were a business person or you're self-employed, you really had to, because it was, how else is anyone going to get your messages? So I get about the whole thing of the answering service. It is a kind of interesting twist. Yeah, don't call my private line. You can call my answering service. It doesn't mean I'm going to call you back. It's a very clever song. Yeah. I wonder how many other people thought he was saying, you can call my private line. Anyway.
Maybe it's just me. But it reminded me of the cleverness of his writing style, of how he was able to pull real life elements of the moment and incorporate them into music. And that's what makes a hit. That's what people are excited about. Of course, we love the timeless songs, but the songs that also reflect our current moment, like this moment right now, are, catch on,
Well, let's talk another song in particular that I think is interesting. I was listening back to it again, School Me, which is definitely not the same as Private Line. It's kind of, really interesting. Like it's got a kind of vulnerability about it. I mean, I don't know. This is something I'm going to ask you. It's unusual, I think, to hear a male vocalist create a song in which he's actually asking his female date or his female friend, partner. It's interesting. I'm struggling for the right word here. The times have changed since 1991. I don't know. Yeah.
His boo, his bae.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I think the lyrics of "School Me" are really, interesting. He basically, if I'm construing the lyrics correctly, telling his female partner, beau, whatever, to guide him through what she wants him to do.
Yeah, tell me what to do. Yeah, tell me what you like, and I'm ready to learn, and I do think that is, a rare quality to say that in a relationship, because men, a lot of men, their ego in real life, they they might not ask, they might not, it's Gerald is saying to men, it's okay to let someone else take charge, or let a woman tell you what she wants. Don't assume, you can be schooled, you can learn a few new things. And it again appeals to both women and men. I was just going to say that I remember the 90s, particularly in dating and listening to my friends, that there was, the ongoing war between the sexes, where dating was difficult. And, a lot of, now you have women working as well as men, they can both earn. So you have this competition in business and in the bedroom. And so we needed these kinds of romantic songs to show the equality in relationships.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's listen to a little bit of School Me.
Because I want to learn what makes you feel good inside and out. Come on, baby. The bell is ringing. Can't you hear it, babe? Can't you feel it, babe? Come on. Can't you hear it, babe? Can't you feel it?
Let's pause there for a quick break. Then we'll return to David Nathan and Janine Coveney as they continue to talk about Gerald Levert and his emergence as a singer and songwriter, working with other artists such as Barry White and Anita Baker, amongst others.
Check out In the Meantime by renowned trumpeter Willie Bradley featuring Gerald Alston, the lead singer of the legendary group The Manhattans. This jazzy groove with lyrics right on time with what's happening in the world today is on Soul Music Records, available now on all digital platforms.
The other thing that you're pointing to, which I think is what singles Gerald out particularly, is, and we've referenced this before, about his vulnerability. So, to be able to given the general consensus at the time, most of his contemporaries would not have been saying "school me." They would have been saying the opposite. Like, well, I'm trying to think of a lyrical equivalent that's the opposite. That doesn't make sense, does it? Can you think of anyone of the time period who was saying something not quite like that?
Close the door. Turn on the light.
There's a little bit
Come
before
over
that, but I get it. It's
okay, Teddy Pendergrass is issuing commands, and it's going to go down the way he wants it to go down.
Well, I think we probably find some other 90s singers who were doing the same thing. Didn't you talk a little bit about whip appeal?
We did, and
whip appeal, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think that there's parallels in terms of the melody and the beat of the songs. And so, you have Babyface, who's, he's the tender lover, he's Babyface, he's the romantic idol, and he has a very different kind of approach to R&B, but also a songwriter, and also very attuned to what women want. And so, but Gerald does it in his own way. And,
I don't think that probably had a lot to do with his success, because he wasn't, I think this is an important point, because I think if you look at the tradition of particularly male vocalists in soul music, it's definitely not usually the thing for a man to be saying, tell me what you want, tell me what you want me. I mean, part of the appeal of Barry White, I think, was also there was that kind of a little bit of that element in what he did. But I think of all the the hardcore R&B and soul singers of the 60s and 70s. Like you said, Teddy Pendergrass was not "tell me what you want me to do" as I close the door. And what was the other one? There's another one. Turn off the lights. There's no ambiguity there.
I'm going to give you a special treat, whether you want it or
not. Anyway, let's move on to the third song.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes, of course, absolutely. Before we move on.
90s. Maybe this is the 90s or the early 2000s. I didn't look it up. But if you recall, there was a singer named Joe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So he also kind of, you start to have these balladeers that try to cater, tell me what you want. Not to be lewd, but his lyric was, "I'll go downtown if you need me to go downtown," which people interpreted as a particular act. So you do have some of that starting to happen, but I think Gerald really, he just made it right as rain, natural, to be vulnerable, as you say, vulnerable and romantic.
Yes, which leads perfect segue into one of the outstanding tracks on the album, which is his duet with his dad, "Baby Hold On to Me." I mean, that is like, for me, that's like quintessential classic soul, even though it's, of course, in the 90s, but it's really, it's just so that kind of tradition of the OJs and even other groups of the, back in that time, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes. I mean, just that, or Teddy Pendergrass, of course. That whole, real, like, raw, passionate delivery. Yeah, and I love that. I love the performance. I loved how he and his father they just sounded great together. What are your thoughts about that song?
I really love that song too, because It's a very romantic song. It has a beautiful melody, beautiful performance. And, being a writer, I always listen to lyrics. I very much get into lyrics and how they relate to the times and what they're trying to say about relationships. And it reminds me that a lot of times, people want what they want, and they tend to don't appreciate what they have. And the song is basically saying, I'm it, as a man, I'm it. Don't overlook me. I'm special. You're not going to get someone who loves you like I do. Think again. And I think that's something that young women and young men tend to forget. They want what they want in relationships. And this is slow down. Wait a minute. I'm being honest with you.
Yes.
With this message. And it's very touching. It's very touching.
Yeah. Well, I just checked. I was just kind of away from the screen for a moment to look at something, and turned out that was actually Gerald's second biggest pop hit, which is interesting.
It is.
And I wonder if that had a lot to do with the fact that his father was a part of that. People had some recognition for Eddie Levert. I don't know. I mean, it's quite amazing to think that was a crossover hit, as we used to say back in the day. So let's hear some of Baby Hold On To Me.
Have a fancy car and diamond rings, but girl, you know all good things come in time. Girl, you know I do just about anything.
See, one of the things that I think that was a concern for Gerald, and we both had conversations, I think, with him later in his career, is that he did feel some sense of frustration. I mean, his Private Line, the album Platinum, Groove On comes out in 1994, and it's a platinum album, again, which is phenomenal to have two in a row like that. And then other albums follow, but they never quite crossed over, as we said, to a pop mainstream audience. And I know that that was one of his frustrations as his career continued, as he really became a part of mainstream soul music and R&B, but never quite was able to capture that pop audience. Why do you think that was?
Well, I think the same things that made him so popular with the R&B audience were some of the things that maybe didn't translate as well to the pop audience. He wasn't a matinee idol. He had that very rough, soulful voice. I don't know, maybe because he hadn't toured widely, he didn't do enough. A lot of times you have soul artists who will team up with more pop artists and do all the duet things that they do.
True.
And certainly he deserved to be recognized more because he really did have that work ethic that he inherited. I mean, he was on the road with the OJs as a child. He saw the theaters that they played. He saw that his father and his bandmates, you had to sing whether you were sick, whether you were tired, you had to keep giving. And, he was tireless in that way in performing, but maybe where he performed and some of the strategic moves that he made didn't move him closer to the pop audience. And I think that's a shame,
Mm-hmm. Well,
do you have thoughts about it?
Yeah. Well, that was something that we referenced Luther a few times. And I think one of Luther's biggest frustrations in his career, while he, consistently sold out in shows, live audiences, I mean, just packed all the time, and records consistently sold really well, platinum albums. But he never, other than Here and Now, he never really quite crossed over. And it was one of his frustrations. And I wonder if it really does have something to do with image, because there were other, black male vocalists who did. So it wasn't like nobody ever did.
Right.
And I wonder if it really did have to do with image. The fact that they weren't, well, we mentioned Babyface.
Yeah.
They weren't, Usher. Well, it's probably a bad
Usher.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like Gerald could dance, but he, and I've seen shows where he did choreography, but he wasn't going to give Usher a run for his money, So
that's true.
Yeah.
Well, I think in winding down, I think one of the things that we both want to address is the fact that Gerald died in his 40s, which is really tragic, and I wonder what the future would have held if he had continued recording. I know that the last conversation I had with him, which as I recall was a few years before his untimely passing, was about the project he was working on, which eventually came out and I believe was called In My Songs. He had purposely begun recording songs that he felt would have that kind of pop appeal. And I understand the thinking behind it, because, you can keep playing the same audiences over and over again, but, any artist will want to expand their base, whether it's internationally or domestically. You want to keep growing and having a larger audience for many different reasons. So I know that was one of the things that he was aiming for. So what are your final thoughts about Gerald? And do you remember the last time you had a conversation with him?
I don't know, but I do remember my first year in Los Angeles. I happened to work for Perspective Records, which was Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis's label, and our promotion team promoted A&M Records projects, R&B projects. And one of the projects that we handled was the Barry White album that had Practice What You Preach on it, which was a song that Gerald co-wrote. Yeah. And so Gerald would come to the Perspective office and have meetings with us, and we got to spend time together. And so what impressed me about him in general was, he was bred in music. I don't know what else he would have done if he didn't have music. That's what he knew: music, writing, performing, and sharing his gifts with others, sharing songs. He wrote a lot of songs for other people, which I don't know is well known, but he also was active in trying to launch other talents. So I remember he had a girl group that was signed to Perspective, and that was another reason why we spent a lot of time with him. And unfortunately, the group, I believe it was 3 girls. Mm-hmm. They were called Drama. Just DRAMA, Drama. And I remember,
you know what? I actually kind of a vague memory of that.
Yeah.
Not a strong memory of it, but yeah, okay.
Yeah. So,
did they live up to their name?
I'm sorry?
Did they live up to their name?
Well, they were very nice girls. I don't remember what happened that prevented them from launching. It's interesting because I recently watched your podcast on girl groups, and it made me think of Drama and the drama of producing and promoting a girl group. But I digress. We're talking about Gerald. I think that we really lost someone who was a music man at heart. And if he didn't continue making music as an artist, he would have continued writing songs. He would have continued discovering, promoting, and developing talent. He was generous that way and totally committed to music. And I think in that way, it was a loss. And one final thing about him is that the untimely way that he died, which for people who may not remember, it was a combination of over-the-counter and prescription drugs that he was taking that took his life. But to me, it was I have to keep going. This is what he's saying to himself. I might be in pain. I might be sick. But I have to keep going. I have to pop these pills and keep moving because people are counting on me, and I can't be down for any amount of time. And that dedication is what I see as part of the cause of why he's no longer with us.
Yeah. Wow. Well, one more thing, I just wanted to riff off of one thing you said to complete our conversation. You mentioned about his generosity in contributing to other people's music and writing songs for others. So one song that I often listen to because I like it so much is a song he wrote with Anita Baker called "Whatever It Takes," which is on her album called Compositions. And I mean, that's just example of the diversity of his talent that and I agree with you. I think that if at some point he had decided, well, I don't want to keep making albums myself, I want to just develop myself more as a producer and a songwriter. Of course, that would have been a great fulfillment for him. I think one thing we forgot to mention, so we might as well address it in our final moments, is when he teamed up with Keith Sweat and Johnny Gill for the LSG two albums and tours, which I think was a very smart move and did expand his audience to include the audiences of people like Johnny and Keith, which were a little different. They weren't exactly all the same audience. So, is there anything you want to say in passing and complete our Gerald Levert conversation about LSG?
Honestly, I was surprised to see these three artists get together. I think Keith was enormously successful at that time on his own. He had sold some platinum albums. Gerald, of course, had his career. And I think at this point, Johnny was kind of in the middle of the new edition. You know, he'd had solo albums, obviously, that had done well for him. He had the My thing. But, to get together, to join forces that way was unusual and fun for the audience. And, they had a huge hit with their first single. I think it was called My Body.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was great.
Well, we just want to pay tribute to a great young singer, songwriter, producer who has left us a really good legacy of music. And so for all of y'all who might be part of a generation that didn't actually catch Gerald Levert, go back and listen to Private Line, and you will get schooled in classic soul of the 90s. How is that? Right.
And we miss him very much.
We do.
Thanks, David and Janine. Please don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform, and visit us for breaking news and daily updates about your favourite soul and R&B artists over at soulmusic.com. For now, I'm Bethany Dawson. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on My Classic Soul.